Welcome to the Aegance Offscript Podcast, where we talk to industry leaders who share their stories, insights, and lessons, unfiltered and unscripted. I'm your host, Lawrence, and today I'm joined by Mike Freislich, founder of LevelUp, a boutique coaching and training firm that helps organizations make strategy actually fly via the flight levels thinking model. Mike, thanks for being here. I'm really excited to dig in.
Great. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks for having me. So we're a small business. It's kind of just me, and I help organizations, as you say, try and connect that elusive strategy to execution, operation, and actually realizing our strategic intent by the work that we do. So that's at the heart of what I like to focus on.
Amazing. And to kick us off, can you briefly take our listeners through what is flight levels in your view, and why does it matter more than ever in organizations who are trying to scale agility?
Good question. I think when we think about agility, usually we think about teams that are doing some kind of agile. And, for sure, over the last 20 years, I've been very much involved in team delivery and team improvement, things like using Scrum and Kanban. But what struck me over the years was there's stuff happening outside of the team that I'm working with, and it's impacting the team. And there seems to be this disconnect between the people who are wanting stuff done and the market and the team, and somehow we need to bind all this together. So what Flight Levels is all about. Flight Levels is a thinking model. It's not a framework or something like Scrum or SAFe or less or whatever. It's rather a way to use a lens to look at your organization through, to understand where do we need to make the changes in order to get the results that we want. So that's kind of the unique piece of it, and it plays nicely with other things. I like to think of flight levels flying above the method wars, you're a waterfall, or you're Scrum teams in the organization, and so on. It doesn't matter. We can work with anyone there. And, essentially in Flight Levels, we think about an organization as less of hierarchy and more of a network topology of services that are interconnected in order to generate value. And within that kind of fractal landscape of an organization, there's a recurring pattern of these levels of types of decisions that need to get made. So at level 1, we can think of this as operational level, and most directly related to what we know about teams. So this is where the work happens. And then there's coordination or coordinative level, where we realize that we need more than one team, possibly many teams involved in value creation. So there's this need to coordinate. So this is flight level 2, if you like. And then there is the need for direction and, where strategy enters the room. And this is flight level 3. And for sure, we need ways of connecting and seeing lineage of what I'm working on in this team is connected to something bigger, being coordinated across with multiple other teams and connected to this strategic intention. So there's purpose is created and context for what I'm doing. And without that kind of golden thread throughout, it's difficult to know if we're making progress in the right direction or not. And usually there are stakeholders on one side feeling underwhelmed or dissatisfied with delivery, and likewise on the technical or the delivery side, there are frustrations about we're being told we're not working hard or fast enough, or we're doing the wrong thing, creating the wrong output. So we need to find better ways to combine the efforts of that whole work system in order to generate the results we want. So this is the space in which Flight Levels plays.
Gotcha, that makes sense. And so when an organization completes a flight level workshop with you, what tends to happen next with them?
So I think the key word there is workshop as opposed to training. So the key difference between those two for me is training is where we're talking about theory and embedding concepts in your mind and hoping that somehow they'll gain traction. Whereas the workshop is intended, for sure, there are concepts that we need to align on, but we're really working with the actual system. So if, for example, we're looking at Flight Level 2, which is figuring out how to coordinate the efforts of multiple teams, we're working with, ideally, members or representatives of the teams we're wanting to coordinate, together with leadership and management that are involved, in order to design what I like to call our current state of misunderstanding of how the work is happening, and build a work system that can visualize and make more explicit how we go about our work. So next up from that, in Flight Level 2 land, in coordination land, is we start using that system. And from there, we're able to start understanding what's going wrong and tweaking the system until things are running more smoothly. And then we can start focusing on how we want to accelerate. But in essence, the workshop for a Flight Level 2 system or for a strategy system is really building something. It's building the operating tool, if you like, that's the center for all our conversations about the work going forward. So that's, I guess, what typically happens next.
Yeah. And how do you help clients move from that sort of workshop outcomes to an operational change that actually sustains over time?
Yeah, so in some cases, this is easy because there's just deep resonance with the method, and it's not necessarily so far removed from people's experiences and needs. But I think if I think about transformation, that buzzword, what usually happens, and in my experience, what's happens a lot, is there's this huge focus on the teams. And when we're focused on the teams and getting each individual team trained up and running in some kind of new way of work and so on, it's very expensive because we've got to, pay a lot of attention to every single team, perhaps even take them through some certified training courses, and there's this big sweep of revolutionary change at the team level, while the rest of the organization's operating system, if you like, is still carrying on like they used to. And this creates dissonance, and this is typically when transformations fail, is we weren't really looking at the whole system. So, in order to get some kind of sustained change, there are a number of key factors, and that is, and I've mentioned it already actually, is bringing the people involved on the journey of the change. So, and starting with what are the dissatisfactions, what are the challenges, what are the things that we're actually trying to improve, and then designing a system together to cater for that, together with at least representation of the people involved. That goes a long way to to selling the change or creating real buy-in, because we're making these improvements for ourselves, as opposed to someone else coming in and saying, from the flight levels police, I've come in and I'm telling you these are the things that you must do. Probably isn't a great way to get any kind of long-lasting change. So that's a whole journey in and of itself, and there are probably a number of key things like building and maintaining momentum. I don't know if you've ever been in an environment where there's some kind of big hoo-ha about we're going to do all this stuff, and then nothing happens for 2 months. This is a great way to lose momentum and lose people's engagement and so on. So really we want to focus on short, sharp interactions followed by real inclusive action leading towards results. And probably another key part, and I hinted at it in the first part of my answer, is we've got to have stakeholders engaged, and we've got to have a strong sponsor for any kind of change that involves more than just a handful of people. Otherwise, again, we're going to run the risk of bottom-up change clashing with top-down resilience of the status quo. So I think those maybe are some of the reasons change might fail. Typically we would work with internal coaches or change people, or and the people doing the work, in order to have them actually create the change. And this way, it's easier to step away and have things carry on working. It's not beholden on the consultant to make the change happen. Yeah.
To connect strategy to operations, in my experience, you often need data. Where do you see your clients struggling most when building visibility into their work systems?
That's interesting. I'm dealing with something right now in a company that I'm working in, and this visibility story is really difficult. It's often impeded by tool choices and so on. But the main thing, I guess, is understanding. Firstly, I at the heart of Flight Level's work systems, because it's based, or it's evolved out of the Kanban world, there's a lot of emphasis on flow. So the flow of value and tracking flow. And there's a whole smorgasbord, if you like, of potential metrics that often come packaged in tools, and you can click on the dashboard and you've suddenly got all these graphs and things. And that's probably the worst place to start. Much more important is that we identify and are explicit about the outcomes that we're wanting from any kind of change up front, because then we can. And there's a great book on how to do this from Doug Hubbard, not the Scientology guy, but another Hubbard. It's called How to Measure Anything. And we can take those outcomes and really decompose them into the necessary indicators or things that we should be measuring in order to ensure that we're actually making good on what we'd set out to accomplish. So I think identifying the metrics that actually make sense for the change we want, or the improvements that we want, is really, really key. So a lot of teams might fixate, for example, on velocity. How much stuff did we deliver cycle on cycle on cycle. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it might be completely irrelevant to what we're trying to improve. So, for example, if we're trying to increase time, not increase, if we're trying to decrease time to market, which effectively is it's a responsiveness kind of metric, a speed metric, then probably measuring the amount of stuff that each team is delivering isn't really going to help us. What we really need to be tracking is what is our time from when a request comes in until when it's serviced, what are the lengths of some of the queues in our system, and so on. So really making metrics explicit and relevant to what we're trying to do. And then there's another thing. There's a kind of an enhanced model that Troy McGinnis has he's extended it, but basically it's called the 6 performance dimensions. And the idea with it is that there are 6 areas of performance that in which we can measure a number of different things. But the main premise is that each of these areas is competing with the other things. So they're competing dimensions. And therefore, if we measure just velocity or just, let's just stick with velocity. So in other words, a quantity measurement, how much are we getting? If we fixate on that and don't measure anything else, guess what? Things like quality might give, or things like, can we keep doing this sustainably, might take a knock. So we need to look at, when we're identifying metrics, we also need to look at what are the countermeasures. What are the things that, if we only fixate on that, could suffer, and track those as well. So those are some of the key things around measuring success and actually driving the behaviors that we want.
I'm quite keen to dive into those success KPIs in a little bit more detail. I mean, you've mentioned, sort of like reducing speed to market, for example, but what kinds of flow or performance metrics are actually moving the needle in the organizations that you work with?
So, I think often the story is the same. We want more, better, faster, right? And, I think the enemy of more, better, faster is we've started too much stuff and we have no focus. So metrics that help us and visualizations that help us see where we've lost focus are really key. So, for example, if the opposite of focus, I suppose, to put it in perspective, is we're trying to work on everything at once. There are 100 initiatives and there are 100 people, and guess what? We're going to get nothing done anytime soon. So, focus might say, well, these are the key 5 initiatives that we want, and there's a massive compounding impact on everything else, and that's freeing up and creating slack in the system, as counterintuitive as it is, helps us deliver a lot faster. So things like, and by the way, a lot of these metrics, all you need is a start date and an end date for a piece of work. So things like time to market, or, I try and stay away from labels like lead time and cycle time, just because they don't tell you anything. So I'd much rather say time in development, or time from received until happy customer, or call it what it is. But those are useful things to track often, and the age of items that are in the system. So, for example, I worked with one customer, and when we visualized the data that they had already in their various tools and analyzed it, there were over 1,500 features in process, right? So, and guess what? There were 3 development teams. So you can imagine what in process meant. I tend to differentiate between in process and in progress, because it's in the process, but it's not actually progressing. We've got a massive parking lot, and there were well over 60% of those 1,500 items were, 200 days old. Some of them were 700 days old. So in other words, they a whole lot of weight and baggage in order to get anything done. So so things like visualizing that aging and where things are aging in a process can also really help us to identify opportunities to create focus and get the value moving again. So those are
absolutely.
There's lots in that space, but those are some.
I mean, I certainly like the way that you differentiate in process versus in progress. I think that's actually a really good way to look at things, because oftentimes in process can make it seem like you're busy because there's lots going on. And as you say, 1,500 odd processes, seems like a lot, but in terms of what's actually being done, or what's actually moving the company forward, probably not as high a number.
Yeah, and there are also visualization patterns that can help in these types of examples where there's an overloaded system, which is most often the case. There's the real problem is overload and lack of focus. So, I saw a board which had well over 200 items on it, and they were all in progress, in quotes. And there was a team of, I think, 11 people that were working on these 200 items. Now, in reality, it's not like each person had multiple hands and multiple computers and were doing everything at once. For sure not. So instead, we can imagine that there's probably at most 11 of those items were active at any given time. So we drew a line on the board and said, above the line is active, below the line is idle, waiting. And then they moved things up and down on the board. When they started working on something, they stopped working on something else. And that at least was a more honest depiction of what was going on. And then you start seeing, oh my gosh, 89 items are just sitting waiting. Maybe we need to do something about this.
What would you say has been the toughest metric to define or to gain agreement across business levels?
Apart from timekeeping, time sheets. Sure. I've got to think about that one. I don't think it's so much about toughness. I guess the one that there is certainly a sticking point around the counterintuitivity, if that's a word, of what's classically called work in process limits. No one wants to hear, especially higher ups, don't want to hear the word limit, because it sounds like all the stuff they're not going to get. And it couldn't be further from the truth. In the 200 things worked on by 11 people scenario, if we limited the number of items on their board to 11, the result would be that they would get stuff out the door a lot faster. They'd be thrashing less in the context of what they were doing. but no one wants to hear, oh, no, you can't limit because then my stuff will never get done. Well, I can tell you right now, your stuff's never going to get done anyway. At least this way we can start generating value. So I tend to try not use the word limit and rather use the term, let's create focus here. And there's different ways we can create focus. WIP limits are one of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how do you balance measurement with the cultural side of change? I mean, how do you ensure that teams feel, or that they don't feel measured, but rather that they feel enabled?
So one of the things, firstly, we've got to think about what we're trying to accomplish, right? And I personally find measurement on the team level should come from the team for for purposes of what they're trying to improve for themselves. So in that sense, they're doing the measuring, not somebody else. What's much more impactful in terms of measurement is the stuff that's above teams. So, especially in most organizations that are more than 30 people, there's the need for multiple teams to work together on a project, for example. So if I'm tracking the delivery times of projects or the predictability of projects, how predictable are we on project delivery? It's a much more useful organizational metric than the velocity of team A. Right. So, and in that way, I'm not measuring a team, I'm measuring a work system, and I'm measuring the value and how it's moving. And in that way, it divorces, even if I look at one of the things in behaviors that I see often in Scrum teams, we start a sprint and we commit to a finite scope of stuff within a finite period of time, 2 weeks or whatever the cycle is. And then come the end of the cycle, oh no, we only delivered half of what we set out to do. And the developers are giving themselves lashes, which is it's not helpful. I would much rather know that, where's the project at, and what is our statistically, what is our 80th percentile of project delivery times. That's much more useful information for affecting systemic change rather than just trying to fix, in quotes, fix a team. Yeah. So those are the approaches I would typically take. Yeah.
Got you. And so as LevelUp grows, I mean, you mentioned that you're a one-man band for all intents and purposes.
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain quality and consistency of delivery as your client base expands?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, so if I think about the market in the last number of years, what I've noticed, and especially since COVID, I think COVID was a massive shake. It shook the market, and it brought people geographically closer together because suddenly remote work was a norm, and at the same time it hit companies hard on the bottom line. And there's been some recovery from that, but it certainly has that, coupled with the various wars and the tariffs and all of the stuff, I think is really dulling the desired spend of organizations. So I guess what I've kind of learned over time is, more often than not, companies aren't looking for a consultant to come in for a month or 6 months or whatever to help them. They know they need help, but they're just not looking for that, generally speaking. That together with, I think, what happened when the belt started tightening and the purse strings started closing in organizations, they did an evaluation. And typically, if you ask the higher ups, so you've spent all this money on agile, on training all the teams and so on. What's the impact for you? They'll go, well, nothing really. I've still got the problems. And that's because the problems exist between teams, not within teams. The major problems that impact multi-team delivery. So long story short, I've pivoted over quite recently, actually. I've pivoted to working in a company semi-full-time in order to really enact a lot of what I've learned over the years to really, really prove it with skin in the game. And so I think for me personally, so long answer, I'm focusing less on client acquisition and more on, I guess, spreading the word. So, of course, I run public workshops and so on as well. So, yeah, I think that for me is what I'm focusing on for at least the next few seasons. And we'll see what comes out. Maybe in a year or two, I'll surface and things might have changed, but that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah. And have you ever considered partnerships or licensing or sort of like an ecosystem model to extend the reach?
So I have many colleagues around the world where we meet. We have community. We have sharing of ideas, helping each other with particular clients and so on. So I have expansion mechanisms. So should I go and work in a large organization and need help, I can call on trusted friends in the space if there's a need to expand. But typically my mode of operation is to come into an organization and immediately start working with people who can help effect change. So it's not up to this one person to tell everyone what to do, but rather build community in the organization already that's motivated for their own reasons of dissatisfaction about how things are in order to effect change. And in that way, it means it's not a one-man show. I can just help inspire the journey, but ultimately, if a company isn't making their own change, it'll never last.
And I'm quite interested around managing human resistance that I assume is inevitable when transformation is in process or in progress. How do you manage that? Do you come across it often? And if yes, how do you manage it?
Yeah, resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it's very direct, and someone will come and say, "No, I'm not doing this." But more often, it's much more subtle. You've silently got someone working behind the scenes with influence in order to get their way and destroy the change. I think this, it's very different when you're just working with a single team and you're all together regularly and you can observe the team dynamic. But when you've got political winds blowing in various directions across a large organization, it's very important to have what I mentioned earlier, to have a strong, influential, and committed sponsor, someone that's got street cred on the ground and at the right levels, in order to have a finger to the wind and to be able to help pave the way. And yeah, I mean, something I've also learned over the years is that probably all major change initiatives revert within about 3 to 5 years. So it's not like we're going to make some change and it's just going to be awesome from that point on. It takes continued work. And the reason, by the way, for that reversion is that in large organizations, executive leadership changes every 3 to 5 years. New CEO comes in, new COO comes in, and when they do, they typically work with what they know succeeds and roll out and flatten all previous attempts. So yeah, it's quite a sobering thought. And when I learned this, I had to really sit down and do some soul searching and figure out, well, am I still happy working in this space? And the answer was yes, because not everything reverts, and not always every single time, but we roll with the punches. That we've got to. I mean, that's life, right? We've got to roll with the punches and find ways to keep engaging at the right levels in order to keep momentum on what we're doing.
So, I mean, you raise a couple of interesting points there. I want to dive into your sponsor, but before we get there, in terms of, I agree with you that when executives step in, and if they're being churned every 3 to 5 years, the new executive comes in. They've obviously been tasked with key performance areas that they need to have an immediate effect on. So as you say, they'll do it their way, and they'll sort of boot the previous processes, which has a sort of knock-on effect on you. Does that mean that you, as LevelUp, should attach yourself to the individual rather than the company, so that when the executive moves on, you follow them to the next company and can apply your services there, perhaps?
Yeah, an interesting thought, and for sure, so I don't think of it. It almost sounds like a remora fish tracking a shark. But yeah, so I don't think of it so much like that. But for sure, people generally don't work for organizations. They work with people and for people. So it's the common denominator. So of course, if someone leaves, and I've actually had this happen quite a number of times in my journeys, someone will realize the ceiling, or there's something preventing going to the next level and where they want to be going as a person in an organization, and they will move. And when they do, they'll take the knowledge with them, and in many cases, they will remember me and say, can you come and help do things in the new org? So I rather see it that way around, more of a pull system. If there's something I don't like doing, is inflicting help on anyone. It's very easy to inflict help. I can see things could be better here, and this is why, and this is what you should do. While there are some people that really want that kind of help, most of us we resonate more with the real challenges that we're having. And I find it better to come in at that level and say, well, what challenges are you having, and how can what I know, how can I bring the knowledge to help you make sense of that? So yeah, I don't actually know if I answered the question after all of that.
No, you certainly did, and the idea of not wanting to inflict help on individuals or companies certainly resonates with me. I mean, the most help that often gets inflicted on me is when I'm on the golf course with my mates, and it's certainly not asked for, and so that's what resonates with me. But Mike, coming back to the sponsor, I'm quite interested to understand. You said that there's quite an interesting balance that needs to be struck with the sponsor. They need to have that street cred, but then they also, I'd imagine, need to have some level of seniority. You maybe don't want it to be like the top dogs, but they need to be positioned somewhere. And I think finding that balance can be quite tough because the higher you make your way up in a company, the lower your street cred becomes to a certain degree. What has more impact for you across those two, street cred versus seniority, when you're trying to bring about transformation?
Yeah, so I think so. There's street cred and there's seniority, and then there's the ability to influence. And influence is probably the biggest part. That and resonance with what we're trying to do and what challenges we're trying to overcome, and the ability to communicate that well within the organizational system. Those are the main attributes. And that often comes with a degree of seniority. I mean, if you never have a seat with the board, for example, and the problem is the problem that we've uncovered is one of constantly changing priorities, and no one knows which way is north, then this is a problem that probably involves, it speaks to a disconnect between the board and everything else going on. So in that scenario, I would need someone who wanted to improve things, who had a seat at the board. Otherwise, we're never going to change that, right? So yeah, I think I had an exemplar sponsor on one of my engagements, and this chap was well versed and well understood the technical side of things. I mean, they were busy, delivering. There was a software development environment within a larger conglomerate, but he understood the stuff that makes people tick. He cared about the people, and he was on the board and the group board for the company. So he had a lot of passion, desire, and so on. I mean, he was the guy that brought me in, and yeah, and we met at least once a week in what I would call a sparring session, where I'm not sitting there trying to coach him or trying to offload a whole lot of new concepts or whatever, but rather we're sparring, we're kind of equals in this, and we can bounce ideas about what's going on and think of ways we want to approach it. And this guy, not only was he senior, but he was humble and willing to be vulnerable in front of all the teams. And it was an incredibly powerful combination. It just felt authentic. And so he was very senior, and he had a lot of street cred on the ground and in the upper echelons of the organization. So it's kind of like a unicorn, but these people do exist, and that's the ideal sponsor. So, yeah.
Got you. And I know that you mentioned at the moment, LevelUp is in a bit of a holding pattern when it comes to growth. But if you look 2-3 years ahead, where do you see LevelUp and what evolution needs to occur?
I think because, yeah, so look, for sure. So one of the things that I do is I work with the Flight Levels Academy. So one of my jobs, if you like, is to work with the Flight Levels Academy, helping build the community there, and further kind of the future of flight levels. So this is an area that I personally love to be involved in because I just deeply resonate with the body of work, and the simplicity of it. And of course, the founder, Klaus Leopold. So that's one thing that I'm going to continue doing, and until there's some kind of values clash, but I'm just not seeing that. So that's something that personally I want to do. Another thing is the project or the company that I'm working with now in a kind of a more full-time capacity is in a space that it isn't about money. It isn't about, it's in education and so on. And so it's likely that if we succeed, that we'll be going well over the next couple of years. So, while that remains awesome, I'll probably stay there. And my other job, of course, is working with running public workshops, and that's something that I would like to try and build a bit more. South Africa, I find, is typically, has been usually about 2 years behind the European market in terms of ways of work and so on. So things are slowly picking up on the South African market, and this is something that I do want to grow for sure, because I think a lot of organizations could really benefit from flight levels thinking. And beyond that, as long as I'm not one of these terrible people that just trains people and doesn't actually do the stuff, then I'm in a happy place. So, until something presents itself outside of that, maybe a big corporate wants to really, really put in the work to improve things, then I might need to build and grow. So I would see it more like a pull system. And I've got avenues to do that. So yeah, I guess I'm at the point in my journey of having done this for so long that I just want to sink my teeth into something for the next season. And there's enough there to keep me enthused, and
Sure.
that's what it's really about for me. There's something about working with companies that really want change and really want it, and are willing to put in the hard yards to get there. If they're out there, give me a shout. I'm happy to find ways to help you.
Well, amazing. On that note, Mike, if our listeners and viewers want to get hold of you, want to connect, want to find out more about how you can help them, where's the best place for them to do that?
Hello at levelup.guide is the email address. Otherwise, levelup.guide website, you can go there and find out a bit more and chat or contact. So yeah, those are the places, probably easiest, or LinkedIn. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today and giving us some insights into LevelUp, but also about, around your processes of how you bring about transformation with the clients that you work with. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So thanks, Lawrence.
That's it for today's episode of the Aegance Offscript Podcast. If this conversation sparks something within you, a thought, a question, or a new way of seeing your own business, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.